Okay, so now we're going to discuss cost allocation and activity-based costing. So as we've discussed earlier, there are multiple methods of allocating factory overhead. One of these methods is through product costing. This is the first thing we need to do when determining what type of factory overhead method we're going to use for allocating factory overhead. So determining the cost of a product is called product costing, as you know. What goes into a product cost? We've discussed this multiple times. As you know, product cost consists of direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. The most common methods of allocating the factory overhead are the single plant-wide method, multiple production department method, and the activity-based costing method. We've talked about single plant-wide and multiple production department methods in earlier chapters, and now we're going to touch back on those two, and we'll also discuss activity-based costing. So using the single plant-wide method, the factory overhead costs are allocated to products using only one rate. This single plant-wide rate is calculated by taking the total budgeted factory overhead and dividing the total factory overhead by the total budgeted plant-wide allocation base. The allocation base is a measure of operating activity in a factory. These would include things like machine hours, direct labor hours, and direct labor dollars. As you know, direct labor hours are the amount of hours that the employees take to build something, right? The direct labor dollars is the amount of salaries that are paid out for those employees. And of course, the machine hours are the amount of hours the machines are running in a factory. So these will be used as a potential base for calculating the single plant-wide factory overhead rate. There's some advantages and disadvantages of using this method. Advantages include that it's simple to use and very inexpensive to implement. However, there's some disadvantages, whereas the rate is consumed the same exact way by all products. As you know, all products are not the same. Some products might require more machine hours or more fabrication than others, and others might be more labor intensive than other types of products that you're manufacturing. And so that's why this rate is not the most accurate. Because if we're just applying one rate to all of these different products that we're manufacturing, it may not work the best for companies that have more than one product. And so the single plant-wide rate is really only beneficial for companies that manufacture one or very few products. For companies that manufacture more than one type of product, other methods would be a bit more beneficial, like the department rate or the activity-based costing method. So let's talk about the departments again. We talked about this in earlier chapters, so this is just kind of a recap of things what we've already discussed in previous chapters. When production departments are different significantly in the manufacturing process, the factory overhead costs are normally incurred differently in each department, as you might expect, because in each department we're using different amounts of labor, different amounts of materials, and different amounts of factory overhead. The multiple production department method uses different rates for each department to allocate factory overhead to its cost. How do you calculate the department rate? We take the budgeted department factory overhead divided by the budgeted department allocation base. And doing that calculation gives us the production department factory overhead rate. Now, before we jump into activity-based costing, we need to talk about the distortion of product costs. When you hear the word distortion, it means the difference. Distortion means the difference. Now, when you compare the different methods of allocating factory overhead, like looking at the single plant-wide method versus the multiple department method, we're going to see differences between those two methods. And the differences are the distortion of those costs. So again, distortion means differences. So there's going to be differences in product costs depending on the type of allocation you're using for factory overhead. So there's a couple of conditions that must be true when looking at distortion costs. One condition, or condition one, is that the differences in production department of factory overhead rates. Some departments will have higher rates than others, as you would expect for factory overhead. In the second condition, there's differences among products and ratios of the allocation base usage within a department and across different departments. Some products have a high ratio of allocation base usage within the departments, whereas other products have a low ratio of usage. So these two conditions would contribute to the distortion of product costs when you're looking at the differences between single plant-wide method and the department method. Now let's talk about activity-based costing. Activity-based costing provides an alternative approach for allocating factory overhead using multiple factory overhead rates based on different activities. This is different than departments. So think of it as replacing departments with activities. Activities are the types of work actions involved in the manufacturing or service process. Under activity-based costing, factory overhead costs are initially budgeted for activities. These are oftentimes called activity cost pools. These are budgets for each activity. Activities, it would include things like machine usage, inspections being like quality inspections, moving products from one stage to another, production setups. We talked about this earlier. Production setups are production runs. So like, remember we talked about the difference between batches or runs instead of continuous process. The batches require production setups for each production line. And so, of course, there's costs associated with that. And we also have engineering activities. Engineering activities means that we're looking at re-engineering our product on a regular basis. It's kind of like making improvements to it. You know how there's a new edition of each product over time? It's because they've been re-engineered each time. It's kind of like your cell phone. Every 6 months or every year, they come out with a new version of your cell phone, and there's slight modifications done to it. Those modifications are a re-engineering of that product. So these are the type of activities that we would see in a manufacturing process. So we assume that the following activities have been identified for this company. Here's an example of a company. This company here, Ruiz Company, they manufacture both snowmobiles and riding lawnmowers. Of course, snowmobiles, as you know, or as you may know, is a recreational thing for people to get around during the wintertime, to drive over the snow. And riding lawnmowers is a way for you to mow your lawns during the rest of the year. Now, in the production of both the snowmobile and the riding lawnmower, there's a couple of processes or activities that are involved in the manufacturing process. There's fabrication, which is the molding of the raw materials to build the frame of these two different products. There's the assembly, that's the manual labor, the assembly of putting these products together and forming them into final finished goods. There's the setup. The setup consists of changing tools and machines in the preparation of making these products. Each production run requires a new setup. In other words, you have to retool every time that you do a product run. You got to fine tune your machines. You got to, re-oil them, clean up the shop for a new run, this type of stuff. That's all that's within setups. There's quality control, meaning you're going to tear down a finished product in order to inspect the quality of how well that product is being put together. That's what we call quality control inspections. And then there's engineering changes. This is where the overall design of these products, for example, a snowmobile or riding lawnmower, the design is continually improved over time. And so this causes what we call engineering changes. And so in order to issue an engineering change, there's a document. It's called the engineering change order that is used to initiate changes in a product or a process. So all of these, the fabrication, assembly, setup, quality control inspections, engineering changes, these are not departments, these are activities in the manufacturing process. So again, in activity-based costing, we're looking at the actual activities instead of departments. So in the fabrication and assembly activities, in the previous chapters, we looked at the fabrication and assembly from the perspective of a furniture company. So instead of looking at them as departments, we want to view these as activities. The actual process of fabricating and the actual process of assembly. Instead of departments, they're activities. So as a result, with each activity, there's setup, there's quality control inspections, there's engineering changes. Within these departments, we look at these as activities. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so as you would expect, in terms of budgeting, we would budget for each activity. And in this example, this Ruiz company who manufactures the snowmobiles and the lawnmowers, there are budgets for each activity in the manufacturing process for each. And fabrication, which is the development of the frames for each product, we budgeted $530,000 of factory overhead. For assembly, meaning the actual labor that it takes to put these together, we budgeted $70,000 of factory overhead. For setup, meaning the retooling, the building for the assembly lines, that type of stuff, the setup of the assembly lines, $480,000 is budgeted for that process, for that activity. For quality control inspections, meaning the teardown of the finished product to inspect and verify that it's correct, $312,000 is budgeted for that activity. For engineering changes, meaning the modifications of these products over time, we budgeted $208,000 for this activity, giving us a total overhead, total factory overhead of $1.6 million for the allocation of these activities. So the cost for the fabrication and assembly activities are less than the cost of when they're production, as if they were in production departments. In other words, with respect to activity-based costing, this is like looking at things from a very granular perspective. This is very, very detailed level, right? And so because it's so granular and detailed, we can be more accurate in our budgeting process. So instead of like applying a budget for each department, when I'm budgeting for activities, I can be very, very specific. And the more specific I am with respect to budgeting, the more accurate I am with respect to costing. So because the cost of setup, quality control inspections, and engineering changes are now separated into their own activity cost pools instead of being within a department, I can be very, very specific to that regard. And so what you'll see is that in activity-based costing, in comparison to department allocation of factory overhead, we find that activity-based costing is very more specific, and we will ultimately save cost when we're more specific in our processing. So let's talk about rates. So as you know, each activity has a rate associated with that activity. We call these activity rates. So the budgeted activity costs are assigned to products using the factory overhead rates for each activity. These rates are called activity rates because they are related to those respective activities. So think of them like department rates, but they're not for departments, they're for the respective activities. So the activity rates are computed by taking your budgeted amount for that respective activity, your budgeted activity costs, divided by the activity base usage. The activity base is the base for that respective activity. So that might be something like machine hours, it might be labor hours, it might be labor dollars. It's respective to that activity. That would be your base. So what about selling and administrative expenses? We learned that these are typically allocated at some point in the process, right? If it's something like single plant-wide overhead, then it's simply applied across, right? If it's department-based, then it's okay to those departments. But what about activity-based costing? So as you would expect, with generally accepted accounting principles, we are required that selling administrative expenses must be reported as a period expense on the income statement. However, selling administrative expenses may be allocated to the products when it comes for us to make managerial decisions. So when we report it to the SEC for a publicly traded company, or for our taxes, we report it as an expense. Selling administrative expenses are reported as a periodic expense on the income statement. But if we're making a decision, an investment decision, then we would include selling administrative expenses in our decision process through allocating it through factory overhead. So one method of allocating selling administrative expenses is based on sales volume. We talked about that, I believe, like 2 or 3 chapters ago. However, products may be consumed in activities in ways that are unrelated to their sales volume. So when this occurs, it's more accurate method of allocation. So what about service businesses? Like a dentist or something like that. For service companies, the use of single and multiple department factory overhead rates may lead to distortion of those manufacturing firms. So in service companies, the use of activity-based costing is used in the determinant of the cost services. And I think in your textbook, it gives an example of a hospital setting, which is pretty cool, because that's actually the way that it works with respect to hospitals. So I do want to, where is it? I wanted to show you guys a couple of examples. That's one drawback with these short versions, is that there's not a whole ton of examples involved. So let's jump into the classroom real quick. I want to pull up the PowerPoint slides. Give me 1 second. We jam through both of those chapters pretty quickly. Okay. So I just want to come down here to the activity-based costing, and I want to show you what it looks like. Okay. Can you all see this slide here with the pictures on it?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay, so this slide shows us the difference between the departments and the activity-based costing. The department rates are what we talked about in earlier chapters. We know that there are two, in this example, there's 2 different departments. You got your production department 1 and the production department 2, right? And each department has their own respective rates that get applied to the production of the product, the finished good, right? In activity-based costing, instead of looking at it from the perspective of these department levels, we have each respective activity. And each respective activity has their own activity rates that are associated for the allocation of factory overhead. And all of those rates eventually get added together to form the overhead rate for each respective product. I wanted to show you a little bit more detail on the example. Okay, so the allocation, using the earlier example of this company that manufactures the snowmobiles and riding mowers. So in this example, the company assumes that they're going to manufacture 1,000 units of each, 1,000 snowmobiles and 1,000 riding mowers. The number of estimated setups we can see is different for each type of product. For snowmobiles, it's 100 setups. For riding mowers, it's 20. For the quality control inspections, for snowmobiles, they're going to do 100 inspections. For riding mowers, it's 4. And the number of change orders for engineering, for the snowmobile, it's 12. For the riding lawnmower, it's 4. The reason why I'm showing you this example is because I want you to understand the concept that with activity-based costing, while the activities are the same for both products, the amount of activity involved in each product is different. So what we do ultimately is we find we look at it from perspective of how many hours it takes for each person to um, do each product based off of the respective areas. So looking at it from departments, we have our fabrication and assembly departments for both the snowmobile and the riding lawnmower. They both go through the same processes or the same activities, but the amount of hours spent in each uh, activity for the different products are different. Like the snowmobile fabrication is 8 hours. The riding lawnmower is only 2. For the assembly, it's 2 hours for the snowmobile and 8 hours for the riding lawnmower. There's a production of 1,000 units for snowmobiles and 1,000 units for riding lawnmowers. So you extrapolate that out, you multiply the number of hours for each respective activity times the number of hours times the number of units being produced, you get the total amount of hours for each activity. And then you would further extrapolate that out by looking at the setups, the quality control inspections, and the engineering changes. And then you keep going to further analyze that data by looking at it from the respective budgets. You have each budgeted amount. You divide each budgeted amount by the activity base usage. We said 10,000 direct labor hours for fabrication, for assembly, 120 setups. So you take your budget amount for setups divided by the number of setups to get you the amount per setup. That's the activity rate. And once you figure out the activity rate, you can figure out your activity cost. Take your base usage times your activity rate to get your activity cost. You can extrapolate all the way down for each product to get your total factory overhead cost per product. And here's how it looks graphically based off of each activity. As we said, each activity has their own activity rate. And then you add up each respective activity rate to get the total amount per product. This is a comparison of how it looks. You can see the differences, right? You can see the distortions as well. So again, the distortion is the difference between each type. We see that in the single plant-wide rate, it's even across both products. And the department rates, it's differentiated between the two products. And in activity-based costing, it's even further differentiated between the two products. It's even more granular, which is great because the more level of detail you have in the allocation of factory overhead, the more accurate your costs are going to be. And so that's kind of what this detail shows us. That's really what I wanted to show you from those slides, because I thought that was important as well. Now, of course, both, as you know, both slide decks are in the classroom. So I strongly recommend that you look at both with respect to the completion of your homework assignments, as well as the final exam. Now, I'm going to also let you know that on my YouTube channel, I have a lot of videos that are uploaded there that you might find helpful to go through with respect to chapters 25, 26, and 27. Well, 27 hasn't happened yet, but after next week, 27 will be up there. And I strongly encourage you to just kind of watch through those, because there's some really decent examples on there. So that is the effective end of chapter 26. Are there any comments, questions, or concerns that you have on chapters 25 or 26?
Nope. No, thank you.
Wonderful.
Because I kind of get this. It's funny that this is like for graduate school students, but I mostly get this.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's good that you understand these concepts. I find them to be very, very important because there's a lot of good applications to your everyday lives.
Yeah.
I have a question about the final exam.
Yes, go ahead.
What is it going to be on?
Okay, so I know that you missed the first part of the today's lecture, but so the exam will cover chapters 25, 26, and 27, as it says in the syllabus. It will cover chapters 25, 26, 27. It'll be mix of multiple choice, true, false, and a few matching questions, just like the last test that you had last week. It will be 2.6 points per question, total of 50 questions. There's be very limited math questions. I removed most of them. There might be one or two. Next Saturday, we will cover chapter 27. We'll also have a very quick review session for the final exam. The final exam will be sometime between April 20th and April 25th. I need to find out from Professor King when that exact date is.
Oh, because you said something about the 19th. We had to have everything done. That's what I was like. So
That's correct. Yeah. So all of your quizzes and homework assignments need to be submitted and completed by April 19th.
oh, okay. I was confused. Okay.
Yep. And that's the reason for that is because they have to be done before the final exam week. Yep. So good question. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay. Are there any other comments, questions, or concerns that I can help you with? No? Everyone's good? Okay. Well, again, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please feel free to email me. I'm very responsive by email. And I'll be around. So if you need me, you know how to get me. Okay?
All right. Thank you, Professor.
Wonderful. Wonderful blessed weekend. Happy Easter for all of you that are celebrating. And look forward to having a good, strong finish to the semester.
Yes, Professor.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
Bye.